Isadora Lima was 27 years old that Tuesday morning. A newly graduated aerospace engineer, she lived in a modest apartment on the city's outskirts and divided her time between studying, temporary jobs, and the hope for a real opportunity. Since entering the public university, she was known for her silence and almost obsessive dedication. While her classmates enjoyed parties and social media, Isadora got lost in books and calculations, dreaming of designing wings that could fly higher than prejudice. No one knew that on that day, the plane she had helped design would make its first test flight in the hangar where she worked as a cleaning assistant. The contrast was too great to ignore. Inside the hangar, the environment was noisy, filled with technical voices, nervous laughter, and the metallic sound of engines being prepared for the test. Isadora wore the blue coveralls of the outsourced company, her hands marked by the routine of scrubbing floors and picking up debris. Most people passed by her as if she were invisible, an insignificant detail in that universe of egos and expensive uniforms. But Isadora knew her work went far beyond the cloth and bucket. She had concrete proof of her silent struggle right there. The Z9, the experimental aircraft that carried her calculations, hours of study and sleepless nights. It was the symbol of a dream threatened by others' ignorance. And that morning, the tension in the air was heavier than the plane's fuel. Captain Vinicius entered the hangar with arrogance stamped across his face. Impeccable uniform, dark glasses, firm steps that made the floor vibrate. He was the pilot assigned to the Z9's test flight and made sure to show who was in charge. When he saw Isadora kneeling, cleaning a stain near the plane's wing, he couldn't contain himself. "Look at that. They brought a janitor to watch the tests now," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the air like the sound of engines. Some muffled laughs arose among the technicians, but no one dared to answer. Isadora remained still, eyes shining but chin firm. She would not give him the satisfaction of a reaction there. Even after the comment, she kept cleaning the floor carefully, knowing that every inch of that hangar held a story. But at that moment, for those who did not know her past, she was just a girl with a rag in her hand. Captain Vinicius had no idea that the same woman had spent years studying aerospace engineering at a public university, juggling jobs to pay bills and tuition, dreaming one day of seeing her ideas take to the sky. He ignored the fact that she was the mind behind the Z9, the plane he would pilot, and that his words carried more ignorance than anything else. In the small lodging where she lived, Isadora carefully took off her coveralls, tired but with an unsettled mind. Her room was modest, peeling walls, a tight bed, and a shelf holding a few objects. A photo of her mother, a framed diploma, and her faithful black notebook, full of notes and calculations. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened the notebook reverently, and let her eyes wander over the pages that held months of invisible work. There were the drawings of the Z9, the adjustments that made the project evolve, the solutions that ensured the plane could fly. It was her silent treasure. That night, as the city calmed down, Isadora reflected on the contradiction of her life. On one side, the pride of creating something innovative. On the other, the invisibility imposed by those who saw no further than the blue cleaning uniform. She remembered the rejections, the ignored resumes, the suspicious glances, the harsh words she heard along the way. But she also thought of her strength, the resilience that made her keep going. And even tired, she wrote in the margin of a page, "They will see me yet. Not for what I wear, but for what I build." She slept with that hope in her heart. The next morning, the hangar woke up with a frenetic rhythm. The smell of oil, the noise of tools, the voices of technicians and engineers created a scene like a living organism, pulsing with expectation. Isadora entered silently, wearing the blue coveralls again, while eyes diverted as if she were an invisible shadow. The Z9 gleamed under artificial light, ready for the test that could change everything. But for Isadora, it was more than a plane. It was the dream she carried on her shoulders, even without official recognition. Captain Vinicius arrived, late as usual, with a confident smile that annoyed some. Without greeting anyone, he made crude jokes about the plane and its controls, belittling the work behind the project. No one dared confront him. The atmosphere grew heavy, and the tension rose like the pressure in the engines, waiting for the signal to start. Meanwhile, Isadora watched silently, feeling the weight of every word, but maintaining the calm that only deep knowledge of her work could give. At the back of the room, isolated but present, Isadora waited for the right moment. Her presence there was no longer that of a simple cleaning assistant. For the first time, her name was on the official guest list, a small victory. The company's technical director finally asked for the floor, announcing it was time to recognize the role of those who, in silence, had helped overcome the project's challenges. An uncomfortable silence took over when he introduced Isadora Lima, the engineer responsible for several technical solutions that made the Z9's success possible. Vinicius frowned, incredulous, while the room divided between surprise and whispers. Isadora stood up, still in her simple uniform, and walked to the center, ready to show that competence does not depend on appearance. With the black notebook in hand, she began to explain the project details with a firm and confident voice, dispelling every doubt with facts and precise data. At that moment, silence was no longer invisibility, it was earned respect. Captain Vinicius approached the board, where Isadora was pointing out the schemes, still incredulous. "You designed all this?" he asked, his tone mixing surprise and disbelief. She answered calmly, explaining the adjustments made to the flaps and the importance of smooth maneuvers to keep the Z9 stable. The technical director confirmed those corrections were essential to the flight's success, which made the pilot take a step back, realizing it was no longer a joke, but a reality he needed to accept. Isadora closed the notebook slowly, looking at the group watching her silently. "I may not be dressed like an engineer, Captain, but this plane is the result of sleepless nights, not ego parades," she said, with a firm gaze that left no room for contestation. The atmosphere was charged, and for the first time, Vinicius had no ready reply. The clock marked 9:17 a.m. when the hangar fell completely silent. The Z9 test flight was about to begin, and all eyes now turned to Isadora. No longer invisible, but a key figure in the project. Vinicius, still surprised, took off his dark glasses in the locker room and tried to organize his thoughts. The hours in which he had humiliated Isadora were clear in his mind, and he knew he could never underestimate her again. Back in the control room, Isadora followed every data point on the monitor, calm and focused. When the pilot entered the cockpit, she felt the weight of responsibility and hope. The engine sounds began to rise in pitch, and the Z9 slid down the runway, following the exact maneuvers Isadora had designed. Every turn, every adjustment was a testament to her work, and when the plane landed perfectly, a reverent silence replaced the usual noise. That day was not just a technical test. It was the silent victory of someone who always believed, even when no one saw. The flight's success changed the hangar's atmosphere almost instantly. The looks that once ignored Isadora became silent admiration, and greetings, once non-existent, began timidly. She still wore the simple blue uniform, but now carried something much greater, recognition for what she truly was. A talented engineer, the brilliant mind behind the Z9. Vinicius, who until then maintained an arrogant posture, was visibly uncomfortable. The humiliation he had caused now reflected in his eyes, a mix of respect and embarrassment. Isadora, however, didn't want a war, only fair recognition. Walking through the yard, her black notebook under her arm, seemed both a shield and a sword, a symbol of the silent battles she had fought. In Delta's meeting room, the technical director summoned the entire team for an official presentation. The tone was solemn, and there was a different energy in the air, as if something big had finally happened. Yesterday's flight was not just a technical success, it was a milestone for our company, he began as everyone listened attentively. Then he called Isadora to stand and receive the applause she deserved. Much of the innovation that made this possible came from her work, he said, with evident sincerity. Isadora kept her head down for a moment but accepted the honor with humility. She spoke little, thanked everyone, but made it clear that this victory was the result of a long, solitary path where few believed in her. The message was clear. Talent is not measured by uniform, but by what one does. Captain Vinicius remained silent, sitting at the back of the room after the tribute to Isadora. His wounded pride weighed heavily in his chest, a mixture of regret and shame he didn't know how to express. When the meeting ended, he approached her slowly, a gesture that seemed more like an attempt at redemption than mere formality. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said softly, almost hesitantly. Isadora looked at him without rushing to answer. "You don't have to apologize," she replied with the serenity that came from knowing her own worth. "I learned not to expect respect from those who don't know me." Vinicius swallowed hard, recognizing that his past words were unfair, but it was her attitude that really taught him a bigger lesson in that moment. A few days later, the atmosphere in the company was completely different. The respect for Isadora came not only from formal greetings, but from real changes in attitudes, conversations, and the way people sought her technical opinions. She still wore the simple uniform, not by imposition, but because her essence was there, focused on work, not appearances. However, this transformation showed that even starting from the bottom, it was possible to claim one's space and be recognized for real merits. The young apprentice who once saw her cleaning the hangar floor now sought her out to learn, a mirror of perseverance and talent. Isadora's lesson was clear. It doesn't matter where you start, but how far you are willing to go. Isadora did not let sudden fame carry her away. She continued arriving early, reviewing calculations, and working with the same silent dedication as before. For her, the blue coveralls of the outsourced company were just a detail that never defined her worth. What really mattered was confidence in her own abilities and passion for what she did. In the lab, among formulas, charts, and prototypes, she found her place in the world. She knew that flight was only the beginning and that many challenges would still come, but she was ready to face them. Her eyes, once downcast and cautious, now reflected a firm light, the light of someone who knows her own path and needs to prove nothing to anyone but herself. Day by day, Isadora became a technical reference within the company. Young engineers sought her opinion, and even the most experienced began to recognize her knowledge. Her voice, once muffled by prejudice and silence, was now clearly heard in meetings. But above all, she never forgot where she came from. In conversations with the apprentice who followed her, she said that success is not a leap, but a series of small steps taken with courage and patience. "It's not about being perfect, it's about continuing," she said. The humility and strength of that message inspired others and showed that true greatness lies in silent persistence, work done with love and self-respect. Over time, Isadora began participating in new projects within Delta, bringing innovation and care to every detail. She was a silent leader who did not need to impose authority. Her competence spoke for itself. In our meetings, her attentive gaze and precise questions revealed a mind always ahead, anticipating problems and proposing solutions. Even when unexpected challenges arose, Isadora faced them calmly and determinedly, a trait many came to deeply admire. For her, every project was a chance to learn and teach, to turn the dream of flying into something real and safe for everyone. Captain Vinicius, once her harshest critic and mocker, now kept a respectful distance, almost with veiled admiration. He had learned the hard way that underestimating someone based on appearance or position is a costly mistake. And although his pride was still great, He did not fail to acknowledge Isadora's talent. In some technical conversations, he discreetly sought her advice. The transformation of their relationship was not just about work. It was a lesson about respect and humility, about the capacity to grow and change even when the past weighs heavy. Isadora knew that the change in people's perception around her was not only because of her, but because of the example her work represented for other women in engineering and for all who had ever been invisible in their environments. She began receiving messages from young people who saw her as an inspiration, women fighting to find their space in male-dominated fields, professionals facing similar prejudices. For her, this was more important than any official recognition. Knowing her path could light the way for those in the dark. And so slowly, she built a legacy that was not only in airplanes, but in the lives she touched. One calm afternoon, after an intense day of tests at the hangar, Isadora received a visit from a young apprentice, eyes shining with curiosity and questions. She remembered her own story, the days she was barely noticed, the moments when exhaustion nearly made her give up. The girl asked, with a mix of admiration and doubt, "Engineer Isadora, is it true you started by cleaning the hangar floor?" Isadora smiled, not with vanity, but with tenderness and sincerity. "Yes, I started cleaning the floor, but I never stopped looking up. I always dreamed big, even when no one believed." The young girl listened carefully, and at that moment, something lit inside her. The certainty that with effort and courage, she too could fly high. Isadora knew it wasn't enough just to claim her space. It was necessary to open doors for others who, like her, started from the bottom. With that in mind, she began dedicating part of her time to guiding young people, showing the path she had once had to discover alone. In the simple office she now occupied, among notes and projects, she talked to them about perseverance, the value of knowledge and humility. She said it didn't matter where you start, but what you decide to do with the opportunities life gives you. And she emphasized, never let other people's opinions define who you are. These words were not just advice. They were pieces of her own story, told from the heart. The hangar, once the stage for Isadora's small humiliations and silence, now had a different meaning. It was the place where dreams were built and flights achieved. She walked there with the posture of someone who knows her worth, even wearing the blue uniform of the outsourced company, because true recognition came from within. Colleagues greeted her respectfully, and her presence became natural. The invisibility that once covered her seemed to have dissipated. But Isadora never forgot that the most important thing was not visibility, but the strength that came from honest work, talent applied with dedication. That was the true engine of her success. In the following days, Isadora remained immersed in projects, but now with the autonomy she had always dreamed of. The responsibility was greater, of course, but so was the recognition. She knew every decision she made could mean safety for pilots and passengers, and that motivated her even more. She spent hours analyzing data, adjusting details, and following tests with attentive eyes, always striving for excellence. For her, it was more than a job. It was a mission. And even under pressure, she maintained the calm and clarity that had helped her overcome so many obstacles in the past. One morning, during a team meeting, the technical director made a point to highlight once again Isadora's role in the Z9 project. He spoke proudly about the improvements she had implemented and how her work had been essential for the success of the experimental flight. Public recognition was finally happening. Isadora listened with a mix of emotion and serenity. It was not just about personal glory, but justice. The validation of years of silent effort, sleepless nights, the time she heard, "You won't make it," and at that moment she felt it had all been worth it. Even with her rise and recognition, Isadora did not let success distance her from the reality of those who start from zero. She knew the path would be long for many. That Prejudice still existed, and the fight would continue for many others who remained invisible. For that reason, she kept simplicity in her way of being, respect for small daily victories, and a sincere desire to help those just starting out. She was often seen in the hangar talking to interns, sharing stories, and encouraging them never to give up. For her, true greatness was about transforming the environment and inspiring real change. One quiet afternoon, while watching the Z9 fly in the blue sky, Isadora received a message on her phone. It was from a young engineer who had joined the company a few months earlier. She thanked her for the example and said how Isadora's words helped her face difficult moments. Isadora smiled alone, feeling the silent yet powerful effect of her journey. It was proof that the wings she had built were not only for flying, but to lift others. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. That day, Captain Vinicius showed up at Isadora's office for the first time since the historic flight. The atmosphere was filled with a strange mix: pride, shame, and newfound respect. He apologized sincerely for having underestimated not only her work, but her strength. He said he had learned an important lesson. Talent and competence are not measured by appearance or rank, but by dedication and knowledge. Isadora listened carefully, holding no grudges. After all, that conversation meant much more than a formal apology. It was the human recognition she had always hoped for, and perhaps deserved. They spoke little, but enough to transform what seemed a rivalry into mutual respect. Vinicius began valuing not only the plane he flew, but the person who had built it, understanding that every detail of that machine carried a piece of Isadora's silent story. From then on, the hangar's environment changed. Not only the captain, but all colleagues started seeing her with new eyes, learning not to judge by appearances, but by true talent. A small act of humility made all the difference in that place that once seemed so cold and hostile. Over time, Isadora became a reference not only technically, but also humanly within the company. Her story of overcoming challenges became an example for all, a living reminder that true value lies in silent perseverance and the courage to keep going, even when no one believes. She never forgot the calloused hands of those who cleaned floors, the looks that ignored her, nor the harsh words she heard. But she learned that these difficulties do heard. But she learned that these difficulties do